This is a review of the book Perspective Made Easy by Ernest Norling. Perspective Made Easy was originally published in 1939. Ernest Norling was 47 years of age and was working as an art teacher when he wrote this book to explain the use of perspective in art. Since then, Perspective Made Easy has been republished many times as a result of remaining relevant throughout the years, and it's a book that you've likely heard me mention before. As the name suggests, this book makes an effort to simplify the rules of perspective, an essential aspect involved in drawing that is often assumed to be too technical and at times overwhelming if you are a beginner. Now, Ernest Norling was a man who was aware of this fact. Likely through his experience teaching, he understood the intimidating quality of such a subject, and here in this book, he made it his priority to remedy that. The back cover states that his approach is so simple and direct that no matter how little raw talent or experience you have, you will soon be able to apply these techniques almost instinctively. So let's take a look at the content inside. The book is ordered into 20 chapters that are instead referred to as steps. With each of these steps, the book gradually introduces new aspects involved in the subject, holding the reader's hand as it guides them through common principles such as the horizon line and vanishing points. It's clear that even from the way this book is structured, that it is aimed towards a beginner who has no existing knowledge of the subject. However, it would be wrong to say that the book is of no use to a more experienced artist because its explanation of the basic fundamentals is always a beneficial reminder. Now, Perspective Made Easy is a book that I often recommend to anyone new to the subject, and here you will see my reasons for doing so. Across 203 pages, Ernest Norling sets out to clarify the laws of perspective, using over 250 simple line drawings to illustrate the concepts involved. These earlier pages start with the most basic yet necessary explanation of the horizon line and its relationship to perspective drawing. It then begins to introduce vanishing points, clarifying their use and involvement when drawing in perspective. Each of these illustrations are accompanied with text that is consistent and to the point. Every page has a purpose, and the information it offers is presented in a way which can be easily understood. Now, what I appreciate most about this book is the fact that it is structured in a linear fashion, meaning you are able to progress through it from start to finish, and with each page, new information is gradually introduced. Its pacing will be especially appreciated as a beginner. They will learn something new which is then expanded upon as they turn the page. It doesn't just throw all of the information at you right away. As I said earlier, Ernest Norling is aware that the reader is new to the subject of perspective drawing and is reading the book to learn. This consideration is what makes the book easily accessible. It doesn't miss the chance to go over something again, showing additional examples before moving on. Now, whilst the book spends an adequate amount of time covering the basics, it doesn't shy away from eventually including some of what could be considered the more technical aspects involved in perspective, such as drawing inclined planes, ellipses, and towards the end, it even covers shadows and reflections. If there's a book which I would want to teach me these techniques, it would be this one. It remains consistent in the way that it simplifies what is involved, making it easy to comprehend. What's also worth me mentioning is the concluding pages in each of these steps. Here the reader will find two headings, Remember and Problems. Under the word problems, he also leaves you with some exercises which will allow you to put into practice what you learn, something that few books do. Whilst there is no step-by-step demonstration of these exercises showing the reader how to approach them, most of what he recommends doing shouldn't be an issue if they have taken the time to learn what was covered throughout that step. Throughout its later steps, the book continues to demonstrate many techniques and methods the same way. The illustrations are as detailed as they need to be in order to get the point across, and each of them are accompanied with some straightforward text. Ernest Norling doesn't go into more detail than he needs to. This book will teach you what you need to know about various methods, but it doesn't overwhelm you by going into too much detail. For example, in the step on drawing ellipses, these pages will give you the basic knowledge required to do so, but it doesn't spend too long discussing them. A more experienced artist will unlikely find anything new, like they might in more advanced books such as How to Draw by Scott Robertson, a book that I have previously reviewed. But let's remember the purpose of Perspective Made Easy. It's tailored to a beginner, and you don't want them biting off more than they can chew. I think that this book ends where it needs to. Some of its final steps cover shadows and reflections, and if at this point you have worked your way through the entire book, starting with the basics, then you shouldn't have too much of an issue learning about them. It's clear that Ernest Norling is considerate of the difficulties a beginner might face when dealing with some of the more complex techniques. For example, towards the end of the book, he decides to include examples of how to create some up or down views, essentially drawing in 3 points perspective, something that is often covered alongside the earlier examples when discussing vanishing points. Perhaps he assumed that it might have confused the reader to present this information too early in the book, and so decided to cover it towards the end. He also does the same when it comes to creating views that are uphill or downhill. Again, this information is generally discussed in other books soon after introducing inclined planes, but here the reader will find it at the end. I think he made the right decision in doing this because even though these methods are relative to the earlier examples, they do require you to consider more aspects that could potentially confuse a beginner, and this book isn't looking to do that. The final step is a brief summary of mechanical perspective. With only a few examples here, it does well to give the reader a taste of the subject. Now, there are books out there which focus specifically on mechanical perspective, and so an artist who is looking to learn would find much more information elsewhere. But Perspective Made Easy isn't attempting to cover this more mechanical approach to drawing in perspective. It's more so making the reader aware, introducing the subject to them and giving them an idea of where they could go next if they want to expand on their knowledge of perspective. Perhaps the book should have stayed in its lane, rather than its last few pages being a summary of all of these various terms and techniques involved in mechanical perspective. But I'm not going to complain about getting more information, and in all honesty, these pages are a good introduction to the subject. I'd recommend reading them to get even just a rough idea of what is involved, and then if you like what you see, buy one of those other books and start to learn more. To conclude the book, Ernest Norling includes a summary of what has been covered throughout its pages, giving the reader what is more so some final advice and general reminders. In regards to mechanical perspective, he even recommends studying any good technical book for the mechanical placing of vanishing points, proving that he was only introducing the subject and never intended to cover it in depth. He also says here that you should learn all you can about perspective. The knowledge gained will give you confidence in your drawing and allow you more freedom. Overall, this summary is a nice way to conclude this book. Perspective Made Easy by Ernest Norling is an ideal entry point for any beginner looking to learn about perspective drawing. It was the first book on the subject that I had ever read, and I'm thankful for it taking its time to teach someone who had no prior understanding of the subject beforehand. You don't need to know anything about perspective before reading this book. If you didn't know where to start, then this is the place to start. I recommend it to many beginners as I'm confident that it will benefit them as much as it did myself. Its content has proven to remain timeless over generations, and it's a book that every artist should have in their collection. I often refer back to its simple explanations and examples, which have undoubtedly influenced how I produce my drawing tutorials. Its content and the way that it is presented justifies its title. Perspective can be confusing, but here, perspective is made easy. If you enjoyed the content I create, then do consider becoming a patron on Patreon. You will gain access to exclusive tutorials, study documents, process papers, real-time drawing footage and more. Plus, you will also be supporting me in a more personal way. Other than that, thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you soon.